Hello, hi there. My name's Geoff. I look after e-commerce and digital marketing for Wiggle and chain reaction cycles. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the Wiggle and chain reaction businesses, and also talk to you about our approach for how we optimize for international, how we try and do decision making and run through trade-offs to get the best out of our international opportunities. So we will make a start. Right, this is Wiggle. Wiggle launched in 1999. It started as a single bike store down in Portsmouth, and it has grown through being an online retailer to having about 1.5 million customers. It's our product focus is really in cycle, run, swim, and a year or so ago, we merged with Chain Reaction Cycles. They started in a very similar way, and a little bit older than Wiggle, started in 1987 from a single store in Belfast. Chain Reaction Cycles now have 1 million customers. And Chain Reaction Cycles is a bit more cycle focused. It's really about mountain bike, road, and BMX. Both of these businesses are actually incredibly international. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we kind of got there. Both businesses actually generate under half their revenue in the UK, and so we run both those businesses. One's based in Portsmouth, one's based in Belfast. We've got one office in Sydney, but we run most of our operations from UK offices. Half of our attention is spread around the world, though. In terms of where we ship to about 76 countries. We've got 14 versions of the Wiggle site. They're all on a different top-level domain. We've got 9 versions of the CRC site. They're on the same domain, but in local folders. And we actively market in about 20 countries for each brand. So that gives you a sense of how we think about international, what we're really sort of talking about today. And it's interesting, thinking about Wiggle and CRC, if you think back to when those businesses were just small bike stores, there's no way they could have done what they've done. There's no way they could have grown to what they've grown to. We've got customers who are receiving deliveries in Australia and Canada and Japan and South Korea, and that just wasn't going to happen before. And in the past, international expansion was incredibly hard. It was incredibly expensive. You needed to build physical businesses out in the countries you wanted to sell to, as well as shipping the products out there. So you may have needed an office, and you may have needed stores, and you'd have probably needed some warehousing or a factory, and loads of really serious investment behind it. And the world's changed quite a lot, and we're going to talk about how we kind of navigate through that new landscape. So, as a consequence, historically, if you go back 20 years to when those two businesses were formed, international expansion was a really well-considered exercise. I remember working for John Lewis 10, 15 years or so ago, and some of the expansion plans we had were in huge strategic documents. We'd have spent millions on consultants to help us work those through, and it was an incredibly risky thing to go and do. And it involved lengthy strategic planning, huge investment decisions, and really high risk. And that's not quite the same as it is today. This happened. The internet happened. This was Google, the entirety of Google, in 1998. It's my favorite picture of Google when you think about all the things they did. This was in Stanford's research laboratory, and it all fitted into one single server rack. And it had profound implications for businesses like Wiggle and Chain Reaction. And this is because, from an economic perspective, the internet does certain things. It allows massive price transparency. For our customers shopping with Wiggle, comparing prices on Google Shopping, they're comparing us in Sydney, for example, with other retailers who are based in Australia, with other retailers who might be based in Europe, or other retailers who may be based in Asia. And so for consumers have huge choice and huge visibility of the price in the marketplace. The internet's clearly removed some geographic barriers. You don't need to write and get back a catalogue anymore to go and get prices internationally, or to go and find the stock that a retailer may be selling. And it's removed search friction, not in the Google sense, but in the economic textbook sense. Search friction is the thing that you need to put up with if you want to go and find an answer to a question, like, can I get this in a different size, or does that component fit with this bike? Actually, the internet's made that really, really easy. And the other thing it's done is it's massively reconfigured value chains. Distributors can become retailers, retailers can become manufacturers, manufacturers can become retailers. And those kind of things now we kind of take for granted. They're all around us. They've been around us for a long time. But back in the days when the Wiggle and the chain reaction cycle stores were first launched, those things were just impossible. You just couldn't go and do that. So the implication, and why it's still relevant now, this has all happened and it's not a new thing, but the implications are very real. They mean incredibly low barriers to entry. For a website that's already selling in the UK to decide they want to sell into Australia is actually relatively simple to do, historically speaking. And this increases the competition amongst the players because you suddenly have an influx of strong originally in local market competitors moving out overseas and taking their offer with them, and it can become incredibly competitive very quickly. And the implication from a business perspective, when you think about what's happening to your customers, is that they become very price sensitive. People can start to shop solely on price because there's just so much choice for them from a price perspective. They're incredibly sensitive to friction, and we're used to thinking about this from a user experience perspective and a conversion perspective, but it's exactly true of the overall proposition of, well, if it doesn't work for people, they just won't use it, and they certainly won't come back to it if it didn't work for them. There are very low switching costs. It's not hard to go and find an alternative supplier. There's loads of substitutes. And it means consumers have tons of choice. So great for customers. In that highly competitive marketplace, where there is tons of choice and you can move around and find the right price for you, actually scale becomes the big advantage. And this isn't really where Wiggle and CRC necessarily are yet in terms of the Spotify or Amazon kind of size. But for those guys, their scale leverages huge product catalogs, and they're able to offer way more choice than competitors. It leverages huge buying power, and it leverages huge power in terms of data. So it's doing some quite interesting things to how markets operate. So for many businesses, those reasons that we've just talked about make international a huge opportunity. And for lots of businesses, even for Wiggle, and Wiggle and chain reaction cycles, where half our business is international, there's still a huge opportunity for us. We really haven't finished. And with 2.5 million customers, we really are only scratching the surface of the sports markets that we participate in. And it's a huge opportunity, particularly if you're in the sweet spot. If you've got a non-perishable product that you can ship worldwide and that has a relatively simple regulatory framework in terms of how you sell it, it means the opportunity really is kind of boundaryless in terms of the markets you can enter and attempt to compete in. And this is the thing that I think is most interesting, is that historically speaking, that is a really low marginal cost. So thinking about the Portsmouth store example, if we wanted to go and open a store in Sydney, the marginal cost of going and do that would be ginormous. We'd have to figure out a way of taking all of our stock out there, renting a store, filling it with that stock, selling those products to customers. Now, actually, if we wanted to go and ship some products to Australia and it was the first time we were going to do it, we could try some fairly simple stuff. We could set up a feed on Google Shopping or enter an affiliate agreement and try and sell that way. And you could do that off a UK website. And lots of people do that. The interesting thing, though, is that simplicity and the ease at which you can do it means that actually you create a brand new problem. And that problem is complexity. You suddenly start multiplying out the size of your business, and you can really spread yourself way too thin very quickly. So we've been using a bunch of frameworks over the last few years to really kind of refine our thinking and make sure we're making great decisions when we go and try and take an international opportunity. So we've taken a really iterative approach. This is actually something that follows lean startup methodology. There's a book called Running Lean. It's an amazing book. A lot of people who've used Agile in software development and customer experience development would ascribe to it because it really kind of fits that model. And the idea, this chap was a startup guy in America. He felt there were 3 stages to a startup. The first stage was finding problem-solution fit. And this is about really getting a deep understanding of a problem your customer base have, or a potential problem your customer base have, and generating some hypotheses about how that problem might manifest itself. Then going through an iterative process to test potential solutions to that problem. And once you've found that problem solution fit, you've got potentially a marketable item, product, service you can sell to customers. So you then move to the next stage, which is solution market fit. And you go and search for markets where that solution is economically profitable for you to sell and for people to buy. Once you've found that and you've tested your way through it, only at that point do you start scaling. Like I say, this is really a startup methodology, and it's all about using data and being very iterative to reduce the risk in startups. So rather than leaping into a new market with a ginormous investment, you just iteratively test your way in. Like I say, very, very similar to the kind of thinking that lots of companies are now employing in agile software development. But this framework works really, really well for international. You can apply exactly the same steps because that's exactly what you're doing. You're looking for markets where consumers have a particular need. They can't get the products that potentially you can sell, or potentially you can serve them better. You may have a solution, and you can create a testing program that will help you roll out in a really, really structured way your international expansion. So through each one of these stages, you're really working through kind of an engineering approach. You start with data, you define a customer problem, you generate some hypotheses about how you could potentially solve that problem, you start creating solutions, and then test them back out with customers. And to put this into an international perspective, you could use this approach when you're kind of saying, how do I expand? How do I go beyond just having a delivery proposition in the next 50 countries down the list? What do I do next? What's the next thing to go and build for customers? Is it a local customer service team who can speak to customers in their own language? Is it about translating products next? Is it about building a delivery proposition next? And we use this kind of approach to think our way through those problems that customers may have and test iteratively for the best result. This is a bit more of an example about what it really does for us. We've really found it does three things. It gives you a real process that you can think through. And like we were saying before, international expansion is historically relatively easy to where it has been. And this really helps us apply rigor to our thinking and not just go after every potential opportunity that moves. It gets you iterating, which is really, really important, and it aligns perfectly to Agile. So if you're running your customer experience or your software development along the side of this, it will fit really, really neatly with it. So to guide us through the problem solution process, we use a decision tree, or a MECE tree. It's kind of a MECE is mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, and it means that you're trying to whittle down to the bottom of a particular problem. So, for example, you start with a problem. Potentially could be customer returns in country X are very high. And you start to hypothesize why that might be. It might be that the labeling on the product was wrong, or the sizing on the websites in the UK and not in European sizing. Or it might be something to do with culturally how people buy in that country. And we would take that first problem, which is high returns, and start to work down, it's a paper exercise, to try and work out what we think the problem potentially could be. Once we've done that, we'll then move into a solutioning mode. And once we've really got comfortable that we've kind of dug around and collectively found the bottom of all of those potential problems, we'll start to think, what might that solution be? And this approach is really helpful. It takes a single problem and splits it out into 3 potential causes and 6 potential solutions. And then once you've done that, you can then start to prioritize those based on whatever framework you're using to kind of try and make that right decision. And again, this is really, really helpful for us. Certainly when you're faced with lots of opportunities, we could turn around and say, let's flip on some affiliate contracts in the next 10 countries down the list. We try and stop ourselves and go back to this kind of approach and say, what problem are we really trying to solve first of all, so that we're being structured about it. This is a real example. This is something we did when we were trying to navigate the complexity of customer retention. One of the things we found is that going international multiplies your problems. Instead of thinking about customer retention once and then thinking about it across all the different channels and product types that you've got, you could be thinking about 50 different points of data. The moment you've gone international, you start multiplying that. So you've then got the French customer retention problem, the German customer retention problem, and each one of those will be subtly different. So this kind of framework can really help you trim that down. This is a real example. When we did this, we were starting in a meeting with a discussion that was about how we price. And we were having a huge discussion about how pricing was impacting retention. And we'd kind of spuriously connected 2 points of data and kind of said, yes, that's it, that's what caused it. And we stopped ourselves and stepped back and kind of said, actually, no, let's just map this out. And when we did, you can see how much of a broader picture we'd really picked up. And like I say, this is really helpful for sort of thinking through those complicated problems. Once we've got, the goal of all of this is to get some stuff you can test. So it's a simple paper exercise, shouldn't take very long, but the point is you come out of it with 5 or 6 ideas. And what you really want to do with those ideas to go and start working on is prioritize them, to pick one and focus in. So this is something we've done. We use a marginal pound framework. This, an example of that might be saying, say you've got a country, you're trying to grow sales in Germany, or you're trying to improve customer experience in Germany. We will run through an exercise that kind of says, okay, if I had £1 left, where would I invest it? Would I invest it into a price cut? In which case I'd need some elasticity in the price to be able to get a payback. Would I invest it in more marketing? And therefore, do I have enough ROI in my marketing channels to do that? Should I invest it in more products, or should I invest it in actually leaving Germany alone and moving into the next market? And we use this as a thought exercise to work through and try and prioritize those opportunities. Those answers are very different if you say, where's the revenue opportunity? The revenue opportunity might be in new markets. There might be huge untapped markets out there that you haven't touched. But from a next pound of investment for the focus of a return, actually the answer might be much more simple, much closer to home. And what we often find is that when we run that kind of process, we really reorder the list. This happens quite frequently for us. So, for example, on the left-hand side, we may have had the old international roadmap might have said something like, yep, go fix the German return model. Let's then worry about France pricing, and then let's think about an above-the-line brand campaign for the USA. And we will generate those kind of lists constantly. They're the kind of things we pick up out of trading meetings and strategy reviews and P&L reviews, and they'll just get dumped on the list. What we'll do is we'll take that list of priorities or problems and we'll resort it, running through one of the processes we've talked about, thinking about where's the marginal return and thinking about what is the root cause of the problem we're really trying to solve. So here's another example of it. So we use this framework when we're thinking about optimization and expansion decisions. This, for example, could be about where do you put your next, £100,000 in search marketing budget, for example. This is a simple grid that kind of says these are all investment opportunities, a bunch of countries that we've then broken into locations that are near and that are far away geographically in terms of distance, and then what kind of language you need to use. So, for example, if you were looking at expansion opportunities that are close by, you could definitely go and do some of that in Ireland. Same language is okay. You can actually use the same language in lots of Scandinavia. Lots of Scandinavian people are quite happy to shop and browse the internet in English. Similarly, you could also look at opportunities that are far away, but are using the same language as well. So the US, Canada, Australia, so on and so forth. There might be a bunch of different opportunities which require a different language, and therefore translation in terms of customer service, in terms of site content, in terms of marketing. So you may be looking at Europe or Asia. The point is, if you tried to make that decision based on revenue, and you were sitting in a planning meeting kind of going, right, where do we go next? What's the next big opportunity? What's the plan for 2019? You might say, yep, all the opportunities in Asia. Certainly from our business, the fastest growing sports market is definitely Asia, and it's definitely China. But it's far away, and you need to be proficient in a different language, which adds cost. And so when you look at this question the other way around and kind of say, right, where's the best, if I had £1 left, where's that best place to invest, and what kind of return would I get from it? The answer might actually be incredibly close to home, and indeed be Ireland. And we use this kind of framework to test our thinking and make sure, going back to the original point that international expansion is relatively cheap, historically speaking, to make sure we're making good decisions and we're not just going after everything. Okay, so like we kind of said, this kind of thinking doesn't really matter in terms of what the question is. You might be starting out on international, you might be 20 years into international, you might have one country you're selling into, exporting into, you might have 100. We kind of take the same approach. So whether we're thinking about whether we need a UK range or a localized range internationally, or UK pricing or international pricing, or local delivery providers, or whether we want to do currency hedging or have some kind of natural hedge, or whether we need local payment methodology, we really do try and take the same approach. We'll go back to saying, what's the core customer problem we're trying to solve for? And what's the revenue opportunity? But then most importantly, where's the contribution opportunity? these are actually some of the things we've, through testing, have made some decisions on. So for Wiggle and chain reaction cycles, we have decided that actually a global range is the thing that we need to do. There aren't many instances where we find it optimal to run a local range into a local country. We have found, though, that local optimization of merchandising does need to happen. Japanese consumers really are interested in a different part of our range than our American consumers, and so we need to reflect that in our marketing and emails and in-site merchandising. We found that we desperately need to do local pricing. There's no point going out into a country with going into America with Japan's pricing system, because you just won't be competitive in our particular market. We found local payment providers are absolutely critical, and being able to allow people to shop in the way they would normally shop with retailers back home is incredibly important. We found high levels of translation are very important. Actually, we've noticed it doesn't massively affect conversion rate. For us, it really affects average order value. But allowing people to read about a product in comfort and to navigate the site without having to mess around with Google Translate or translate it themselves really makes that shopping experience better for them, and it really comes through an average order value. We've found that local data models work best when we're doing prediction models and recommendations for customers, and we found that localized emails that are translated absolutely work best. The point is, those things will be different for each business, but they're all trade-offs. Each comes with a cost. To go and translate emails, you need to have a team who can translate emails. To go and do local data models, you need a team with the capability to do local data models. And it's important to be thinking about the contribution impact of doing that, whether that's really going to move your business on, or whether it's something that customers really don't need. Another thing we've kind of done, and we do this at a country strategy level to help us, if you're thinking about the 20 focus countries we operate in across the two bands, that's really 40 countries we've got to think about at any one point in time. And we use some pyramid frameworks like this to help us just collate our learning that we've built up over time, so that we are making the right decisions as we try and rapidly move through stuff. This is an example of a particular country where we've found that actually delivery is the foundation for being able to successfully resell in that country. On top of that is translation. Next it's marketing, next it's customer services, next it's pricing, then it's payment methods, and then after that it's local data models. And this is a useful way of doing it, because if you think about those 40 countries that we've just talked about, each one will be in a different state of development. In some of those countries you might only have the first 4 of these, in other countries you may have all of them. And it's useful for us to keep a really simple roadmap like this that kind of says, right, what are we doing next in France? What's the next big opportunity? What's the next big customer problem to try and solve? And this is kind of a way we've tried to do that. Okay, so in summary, compared to 20, 30 years ago, the internet gives you an amazing starting point for internationalization. You get price transparency, you remove search friction, you get a chance to reconfigure value chains and create value for customers, and it completely removes a bunch of really complicated geographic barriers that used to exist. But those low barriers make markets incredibly competitive, and it can be really difficult to know where to go to next. So you need some frameworks to really help you make good decisions, identify real customer problems, and frameworks to help you navigate trade-offs, so you're prioritizing your decisions really well. That's it. Thanks very much.